At rock bottom, the answer to that is that over a lengthy period, they let their spiritual lives burn low, so they're not really walking delighted in Jesus, and the spiritual sustenance they're getting from their joy in God is not adequate to the outward demands on them in leadership. It's like this: here's the Lord, and here's you, and he's filling you up, and the illustration's not perfect. He doesn't stop. But if I don't stop, then that's going to go wrong. So he imagine that he's filling you up. And the question is, this beautiful blessing that he's filling you with, how does it get out from you to bless those around you? And in pastoral ministry, the usual answer is this: that we take a drill and we punch holes in the cup, right? So that pastoral decision that you have to take but can't defend, and you get criticized for, bang, and the water splurts out and people are getting blessed. That meeting that you went on way too late and you took decisions at midnight that you fretted about till 3 o'clock in the morning and didn't sleep, and then you were exhausted the following day. Bang! Splurts out. The fact that you never ever get to take a weekend off despite the fact that you have elderly parents at a distance who need your support. Bang! The fact that you only ever get to take time off in ministry when there's nobody to spend it with, so you're constantly in isolation. And you're working when everybody else is socializing. Bang. The fact that you're the only person in the church who doesn't get to access the kind of feeding that you deliver for everybody else, except for your spouse. Bang. The blessing's coming out, but what nobody realizes, because they're enjoying the blessing, is that they're getting it at the expense of your depletion. Okay? So you're running on fumes while they're getting blessed. Nobody survives that for more than 15 years. They just don't. Everybody crumbles after 15 years. Now, the alternative, obviously, is we patch up the holes in the cup, and the Lord is not stopping filling you up until what you're giving is out of overflow. Right? You are now full, and you're giving out of fullness, not out of emptiness. Now, the people who are getting blessed by you simply don't know the difference. They don't know whether the way that you are blessing them is coming out of emptiness or out of fullness, but you know and the Lord knows. Mm. So the question I think that I have is, how do we make sure that leaders get that? How do we make sure that they are not the least fed people in the church over 15 years when they're feeding everybody else? That would be the first thing that leads leaders into burnout. The second thing would be lack of shared expectations. Nobody knows how much they're doing, but everybody thinks that it is less than it is. There's a very interesting piece of work by an Australian bishop many years ago in a book called Going the Distance. And he asked church leaders for their number of hours and number of days a week. And it was somewhere, I can't remember the exact figure, it was somewhere sort of 60 to 65 hours a week and 6 to 6.5 days a week. And then he asked their church wardens what the church wardens thought that the vicars were doing. And there was a day and a half week discrepancy. They thought the church wardens thought they were doing much less. Now, regardless of how much of that figure is perception and how much of it is reality, those folk perceive themselves to be under a day and a half more pressure a week than anybody knew that they were under. And the book very interestingly explores that kind of figure. The critical question, I think, is this: that as a church, you should eagerly desire for your leaders to be the most replenished and refreshed people because they're feeding you. And if they're not, if they're the most exhausted people in the church, then why on earth should you think they've got anything to feed you with when you come to church on Sunday? The first rule of leadership is this: you've got to be alive, because dead leaders don't lead anything. And by the time you've got to the point that leaders are on their last legs, frankly, their spiritual life disappeared years ago. The very first thing that gets squeezed out when they're living in that red zone of 100% all the time is their prayer life, because nobody knows about that. That's invisible. And prayer, worship, wisdom, all flow out of space with the Lord. Does your church want people who... Do they want to gather to leaders because out of their competencies they seem to deliver a lot? Or do you want to gather to your leaders because they are saturated in the presence of God? And you just know that God is going to be at work in power in your life if you're with prayerful people. Many church leaders are secretly terribly afraid that what their church wants is the first of those, the performative type. And therefore, you work up to the max, you deliver all the activities, you end up running hard just to stay still, and by the time you're at that point and you're being applauded for it, your spiritual life has gone out of the window 5 years before. That is an inevitable recipe for leadership's crumbling when you get to 45 or 50 years.